A few years back, Debbie and I decided to cut the tree down next to our swimming pool. And since I did not own a chainsaw, I called a friend and borrowed one from him. He gave me a quick demonstration on how to start it. And so when I returned home, I immediately went to work. Well, that's not quite true. I immediately tried to go to work, but I pulled and pulled and pulled, and I couldn't get it started. And so my son, Rick, who was in college at the time, said, "Dad, let me have that. I'll show you how to do it." And so he pulled and pulled and pulled, and he couldn't get it started. Debbie was enjoying the sun on the deck in her bathing suit, and she was also enjoying the entertainment we were providing. And she said, "Do you think maybe I should come down there and start it for you?" And so you can imagine we graciously accepted that invitation. We said, "No." So I took the chainsaw back from Rick, and I started. It wasn't working. He took it back to me, and we just went back and forth for a long time. And by this point, we were both frustrated with the chainsaw and with each other. Finally, Debbie came off the deck, barefoot, and in her bathing suit, and she said, "Here, let me do it for you." Now, I got to tell you, I'm used to this scene. Whenever I say, "It can't be done, it's not going to work," Debbie quickly proves me wrong. Rick, on the other hand, is not accustomed to this, and so he immediately started arguing with his mother. Well, she pulled a couple times, and it didn't start right away, and so she did something very unusual. She read the instructions right there on the chainsaw on how to start it. And she followed those instructions, and by an act of God, it started up. Well, she started hacking off limbs, and Ricky's saying, "Mom, you can't do it that way." And she said, "Just watch me." She continued. She cut down all the branches. She finally cut down the trunk, and it was all gone. All that was left to do was to cut everything in these nice little stackable pieces. And she said, she turned this off. She said, "Think you can handle that?" And Ricky's like, "We got it." He took that chainsaw and he pulled it, and it didn't start. And he pulled and pulled and pulled, and it wouldn't start. And Debbie was on the deck, and she starts giggling, and he said, "You should never argue or laugh at a man with a chainsaw in his hand." Then she burst out laughing and said, "Oh, really? And who's going to start it for you?" Well, we look back now, and we laugh at that situation. But I got to tell you, it was very frustrating at the time. Rick and I had become irritated with the chainsaw, with each other, and of course that tension only increased when that third person, Debbie, entered the picture. What was it that caused the stress in the situation? Was it the fault of the chainsaw? No, it functions according to the skill and knowledge of the person working it. Was it Debbie's fault? No, she was simply trying to achieve that stated goal of cutting down the tree, and she actually had been very patient watching us try to figure that out. Was it that Rick and I were inexperienced in operating the chainsaw? Well, yeah, that could have alleviated much of the problem. But I think what really caused the irritation was the fact that we did not want to admit that we couldn't do it. It had to be that stupid chainsaw, and surely a woman is not going to show us how to do it. And so our pride got in the way. Our pride and our ego got the best of us. Fortunately, we were able to keep our frustrations in check and not allow it to affect our relationship. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. When we allow circumstances to overwhelm us, oftentimes it causes conflict with those around us. And if it's not dealt with in a Christ-like manner, a spirit of division can soon follow. And then when it becomes full-blown, the relationship, it either continues in a crippled state or a permanent separation takes place. A church splits, a marriage ends in divorce, a friendship dissolves, or a partnership is broken. And this is really not what anyone intended, and surely it was not God's goal for his people. So what causes that breakdown? Where did things go wrong? How did we get here? Well, typically, rather than offering forgiveness, a heart becomes filled with bitterness. Rather than choosing harmony, We allow selfish desires, our wants, or maybe our egos to become between that relationship with the other person and sometimes between us and God. We're in a series titled Whatever. And we're unlocking the secret to keeping a positive and a joyful attitude so that when those frustration levels get so high, about to get the best of us, those times when we just want to throw our hands up in the air and say, whatever, and walk away, we can keep that attitude positive and joyful. Last week, we learned where to start. Anybody remember what it was? Whatever happens, keep praying. Exactly. Now, when I say pray, don't just go through the motions of prayer, but pour your heart out to God. And as we're praying, we're trusting Him rather than demanding Him and saying, God, I want this and this and this. We trust Him. God, what is it you want? What is it you want from me? We're praying for other people, not just for ourselves. And most of all, we're praying for spiritual growth, not just physical wants or needs. And we learn from Paul that we need to pray that our love would grow deeper, that our wisdom would increase, and that we would live a pure and blameless life. Think about that. We would be more loving, act in wisdom, and be blameless. Imagine how much better off our world would be if that's the way everyone handled conflict and frustration. Well, today we're going to look at another key factor when dealing with those whatever times, and it is this. Whatever happens, stay united. The Apostle Paul understood the importance of unity. He was speaking from experience. On the positive side, Paul and Timothy had kindred spirits, and Paul wrote of Timothy in Philippians 2, which is where we'll be today. He said, I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone looks out for his own interest, not those of Christ Jesus. So Timothy, like Paul, was more concerned about the mission than he was himself. His wants and his desires, they took a back seat. On the negative side of unity, Paul had such a sharp disagreement with Barnabas, his colleague in ministry, that they parted company. And although God was able to take a bad situation and use it for good, He always can, because of a disagreement, Paul and Barnabas parted ways, and Paul lost a very good friend. Unity, like prayer, opens the door for God to do a mighty work in us and through us. Therefore, Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, whatever happens, stay united. And we're going to see, first of all, that unity comes from a healthy heart. Listen to what Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from His love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion. Now, when Paul says if, he's not saying, well, if by chance you've received encouragement or comfort or tenderness or compassion, it's a statement of if, and you should have. You should have received these because they are a natural part of the Christian life. When you're walking with God, these are a natural byproduct. And so if your faith does not give you encouragement or comfort or compassion, it's an indicator that something is not right between you and God. One of the foundational principles in the Bible is what you sow, you shall reap. And that's pretty much in any endeavor in life. What you sow, you shall reap. What you plant, that's what you're going to get. If you were to go to someone's house and they said, hey, let me show you my garden, and you see tomatoes and cucumbers and corn, you can rightfully assume they planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and corn. You would not expect them to say, I don't understand that. That's not what I planted. I planted green beans and zucchini. But even if they did say that, are you going to believe their words, or are you going to believe the harvest of what you see in front of you? It's obvious they planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and corn. Well, in the same way, if our hearts are filled with encouragement and comfort, tenderness and compassion, then our attitude reveals what's been planted in our hearts. The fruit of the Spirit is taking root. On the other hand, if we're bitter, we're rude, we're argumentative, that too is an indicator of what has or has not been planted, because what's in our heart will eventually come out. And what that means is we can read our Bibles, we can pray every day, but if our hearts or our attitudes aren't changed, then it's an indicator that, okay, we went through the motions, we went through a ritual of praying and reading our Bible, we checked it off our list, but we were not transformed by the amazing, life-changing power of Jesus Christ. So take a minute and take a look at your heart. What does your harvest look like? Do you see those words there? Are you encouraged? Are you finding comfort from His love? Fellowship with His Spirit? Is there tenderness? Is there compassion? Is your heart growing? Is it healthy? Is it full of vitality? Or are you in a spiritual drought? Think about this. What is the harvest? What is your attitude about the church? What is your attitude about your marriage or your family? What's your attitude about your life and even life in general? Now, whenever whatever happens times come about, it's important to remember there is no such thing as the perfect anything. In fact, whenever we deal with other people, eventually there's going to be conflict. How do you deal with those? What's growing in your heart? Well, having a healthy heart and a unified spirit helps us to overcome those feelings of frustration. It keeps us moving forward, keeps us focused on the greater purpose. So to keep our eyes on the goal, rather than get sidetracked by our feelings, we need to have a healthy heart. Well, unity will strengthen an organization. It will strengthen a team, a church, a family. And yet, unity does not happen by accident. Unity takes a disciplined mind. Paul writes in verse 2, "Make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose." Look at those words again. Be like-minded, have the same love, be one in spirit and purpose. I read that, it reminds me of a game that we used to play at camp. I don't remember the name of it, but each team would join hands like a chain. The person in the front of the line, they had a free hand, but he was joined to the chain. The person in the back, they gave a flag. They would tuck it in their pocket, part of it hanging out. And so the object was your team had to stay together, and you would chase the other teams, and you would try to grab the flag out of their team while protecting the flag of your team. And it was quite interesting to watch because they're running around and everybody's chasing one another. But when the game was over, we asked the kids, okay, how does this game affect life? You're trying to grab their flag and someone else is trying to grab yours and you have to stay together. And here's what the kids came up with. They said the flag represents God's word and righteousness in our lives. We have to protect it because Satan and other people are always trying to take it away. They said the other teams are like sin, and so we have to avoid it so it doesn't destroy our lives. And our teammates are like fellow Christians, and they have to work together so we don't divide ourselves. I thought that's pretty impressive from a group of kids. But again, it was always interesting to watch because as the front of the line is moving one way, the back of the line sends someone trying to grab it, and they're trying to move the other way. And so often you'd see the front of the line reach out and grab the flag in victory, and as they turn around, they left their teammates behind. They broke chains. Unfortunately, that happens much too often in life as well. We go after a goal, but in pursuit of that goal, we've separated, we've lost the people that we love. Unity focuses on the purpose, the plan, and the goal rather than our individual desires. Paul wrote, a group that is unified thinks as one, loves as one, acts as one. And if you think about that, that's why Jesus could pray, "Father, not my will, but your will be done." Imagine what could happen if people focused on unity rather than their own wants and their desires. if they fought back those selfish urges and they supported the betterment of the group instead. Even though they didn't like what that other person did, they still determined to show proper respect. What if everyone followed the example of Jesus and they did nothing from selfish ambition? We'd live in a different world. Churches would be in harmony, marriages would flourish, families would be a place of shelter and comfort, and relationships that are strained would be restored. So what prevents unity among us? A disciplined mind. What happens is one or both sides lose focus of their true purpose for being together. One or both sides get confused with or consumed with their own wants and desires, ignoring the price that will be paid. We don't even want to think about it. One or both sides rationalize away their ungodly behavior. And then disunity begins when people don't discipline their minds and they give in to those feelings instead. Staying united requires a healthy heart and a disciplined mind. Well, we also need to realize that unity has enemies. Verse 3, Paul writes, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves." In verse 14, he writes, "Do everything without complaining or arguing." So here we find 4 adversaries that will kill unity. First one is selfish ambition, that we put our desires above the needs of the others. Our desires take precedent over their needs. And he says, selfish ambition, we think we're better than other people. We're threatened by those who possess the same gifts or the same talents as we do. We become protective of our positions. Our actions are really rooted in what will be best for us rather than the group. It talks about grumbling and complaining. That's just kind of a negative mindset that specializes in finding fault. And typically, when we're in that mode, we masquerade it as constructive criticism, but it really doesn't lead to positive change. Instead, our attitude drags other people down. Negative talk begins to penetrate the entire group. And think about that. We saw during the Exodus that God performed miracle after miracle after miracle, but the grumblers kept instigating the people. It led to 40 years wandering in the wilderness because they had the negative mindset. And he says, arguing. There are some issues that are worth taking a stand for. And we should take a stand for those issues. But I think there are many times that we're arguing not because of conviction, but we just want to be right. And so we dig our heels in. We're not going to budge. And this attitude does not only destroy unity, it just sucks the life out of everyone. Without a disciplined mind, we offer little resistance to these enemies. And once they creep in, we lose sight of the goal. And we can only see our agenda. Not the original agenda, but the agenda we now have. We've lost sight of that goal. We're over on a side path. We become blinded by our pride and our selfish desires. And when that happens, our relationships get hijacked. We have little concern for other people. And that new agenda is going to be met whatever the cost. And here's the thing. Never realizing that we're the problem, we get frustrated with other people. And we even get frustrated with God. And so if we're not experiencing the blessings of unity, we need to start examining our own heart first. Stop looking at everybody else and blaming them, but we need to look inside. Because what will happen when we say, okay, God, show me the truth? That's a dangerous prayer. God, show me the truth about this situation. Show me the truth about my heart. And what we're going to find out is many times we think we're dead right. God will reveal that we're dead wrong. I know from personal experience. So whatever happens, stay united and battle those enemies and those attitudes that will destroy our relationships. Well, finally, unity has the ultimate example to follow. Paul didn't simply say, hey, whatever happens, stay united, but he gave us an example, a life to imitate, and the ultimate role model. Let's pick up in verse 4. Each of you should not only look to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Paul held up the life of Jesus. He pointed to him and he said, this is how you should live. This is your example of unity. We look at that. Instead of demanding his rights, Jesus was willing to release them. He didn't grasp it, but he released them for the sake of the goal. Though he was God, he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he focused on his responsibility. And being secure of who he was, understanding his purpose in life, Jesus made himself nothing, and he took the nature of a servant. To follow the example of Jesus, we have to stop demanding our rights. We have to focus on our responsibility. We have to start serving rather than sulking when we don't get our way. Because when we do that, when we do it God's way, we free ourselves to experience the best that God has for us. And others will appreciate that. I was in my office years ago when a guy came in, Mark, and we had been pretty good friends, and he said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. My wife just respects me. She chooses her family over me all the time. I just can't do it anymore. And he went on, but he said something that I still remember. He said, I love my kids, and I would go to hell and back for my kids, but I can't stay married to her anymore. I interrupted. I said, what did you just say? And he repeated it. I asked him, I said, how can you say you would go to hell and back for your kids when you can't even stay in a bad marriage for your kids? I mean, I'm sure you believe that. I'm sure it makes you feel better, and it does ease your conscience, but it's just not true. And so we talked a little bit more, and as frustrated as he was, he went home and he stayed with his wife for his kids. And instead of focusing on his perceived rights, he started focusing on his responsibilities. And he discovered that his wife was not the source of all his problems. Many of them he saw staring at him from the mirror. That was almost 15 years ago. He's still married. His attitude has changed. So has his marriage. And his kids are much healthier for it. Jesus made himself nothing, taking the attitude of a servant. We are called to do the same. Whatever the relationship is, marriage, family, work, friendship, whatever, our goal is not to be right. Jesus was right. Still, he surrendered his rights. He acted in love to attain that goal. Maybe it's time for you and me to have a new approach. Stay united by following the example of Jesus. Unity. Cain lacked it. It led to the death of his brother and also to a miserable life for himself. David possessed it, and God rewarded him for it. Unity. It's what Jesus prayed for just before his death when he was praying about the church. Unity is what keeps our minds focused on the goal rather than our emotions. Unity can be the difference between winning a championship or losing in the first round. In a marriage, it's a matter of until we're separated by death. In the church, it's a matter with eternal consequences. Unity. It's what our country needs right now, although maybe not in the way they think, but we need unity according to God's standards. Unity. It's what our families crave. Unity matters. So whatever happens, stay united.